Everyone was in shock. It just doesn't happen in Boston. We know that Asian gangs exist. We know who the members are. We know who their leaders are. But we kind of coexist.
During that couple months, Chinatown really quiet, and people are afraid to come out.
I swear to God, it's like being in a movie. It is so surreal.
It haunted me. I will say this, it haunted me. Whenever I walked down Tyler Street, I looked for it. I looked for that place. I want to say that's where it was.
Back in 1991, there was a gambling game going on at a gambling den when 3 individuals came in, armed, and shot execution style 6 people.
The fact that 3 people would walk into a club and just execute basically all the people that were there really is disturbing.
It could happen any place, anybody. You could be innocent. Like those was killed.
Because it's the 30-year anniversary, it was just recently, people realized that one of the suspects is still out there.
2 are captured and incarcerated, but there's still 1 out there, Hung Tian Pham.
We are also announcing a reward of up to $30,000 for information leading directly to his arrest.
Law enforcement will not rest until he's captured.
My name is Richard Suhu. I'm an insurance agent. I was born and raised and grew up here in Chinatown. I have a lot of knowledge about what happens in Chinatown. I keep my ears to the ground. Chinatown actually was a booming community. Business was vibrant, Asian population increased. It was humming, it was moving right along.
My father used to own the restaurant, way back in the 70s. This is number 8 Tyler Street. At that time, it's a Chinese restaurant. We serve, real Chinese food. My name's Rosemary Lam. I just work in my father's restaurant at nighttime because at that time they kind of open late. Chinatown, famous for the restaurant always open till 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning.
Chinatown's a very active community, a lot of hustle and bustle, but it also had various criminal enterprises operating in there.
I've been a journalist in Boston since 1989. I came here to work for the Associated Press and subsequently worked for the Boston Herald for about a dozen years. Boston had a reputation of being a very dangerous town, and there were a lot of shootings, and there were a lot of bad things that were happening.
My name is Harold Bud Farnsworth. I was working at New England Medical Center in Chinatown or in Boston, Massachusetts in 1991. I was in charge of security in the emergency room. You could throw a beer can from the front of the emergency room doorway, and if you got a decent arm, hit the building that this all occurred in. I'm used to dead people, I'm used to death, transporting people back and forth from rooms to the morgue, so on and so forth, but nothing like that.
I think it was well known that Chinatown had gambling parlors, what have you, social clubs where people would play cards or other games to gamble.
There were a lot of prostitutes in there. A lot of prostitutes worked that area. I worked late at the Herald. They'd come out late and they would be out there. So there was an aura of this was not exactly a safe area to walk through by yourself late at night.
We know the Asian gangs exist. We know who the members are, we know who their leaders are, but we kind of coexist.
Chinatown kind of unique community, I would say. and they have their own rules.
I've been working here for 40 years. Everybody concerned about it. But the best bet is don't associate with them, get away from them, and while you see them around that area, you walk away from them and you mind your own business. We mind our own business.
It's no secret who they were. For myself, like I said, a lot of them were my clients for insurance purposes. They had the respect of the community. We could talk to them. If there was any issues, we could communicate. If they were to go to your restaurant to eat, the restaurant owner probably wouldn't charge them. They just eat and thank you and leave,
They came here, they ate, and said, see you later. What am I going to do with it? You call the police. If next time they come in again, then I would say, now, are you going to pay this time or are you going to walk away? So they know what that meant. So they knew I'm not easy to deal with. So they walk away. But before the shooting, it seems it's peaceful because those groups of people, they compete each other, but they did not fight each other. For some reason, I don't know what happened on that particular night that happened. I presume that was the interest who controlled that area.
I think it's important for this fugitive case that we're talking about to step back in time a little bit into the 1980s, when Chinatown was ran by Stephen Say and the Ping On gang. They were a Chinese criminal organization.
They call him Godfather because he knows a lot of people and people will respect him. He could negotiate and tell people, shouldn't do this, shouldn't do that. That's why. So some people call him Godfather, that's all.
You call him Godfather?
No, I call him brother.
Well, actually, his rise to the top was, kind of sudden. It came out of nowhere, and that's the name he gave himself, Sky Dragon, right? That's the English translation of his Chinese name, what he's known as. Instead of Godfather, they call him Sky Dragon.
What is that in Chinese?
Well, Chinese is Hen Long. Hen is heaven, sky, Long is dragon. So, and he was able to recruit local kids from Chinatown to follow him.
Many people in Asian organized crime have nicknames. It is somewhat of a prestigious name, the Dragon. During Chinese New Year, the Dragon is always very well represented. Stephen Say's restaurant was the Kung Fu, and it was in Chinatown. He basically ran the rackets in Chinatown, extortion, gambling, prostitution, things like that.
There was a person known as Sky Dragon.
Yeah, I know that person.
What would you say about him?
I mean, to me, he wasn't the bad guy, but I don't know what kind of business he does, on this side, and just a regular normal guy to me. He's kind of protecting Chinatown. He have his, group, his group of people, and try to, in Chinatown, try to protect and not allowing a lot of outside people come in to do, troubles, like that.
Eventually, though, Say did leave Boston for Hong Kong, only to return later on when his gang started to become less powerful. I think it was in August of 1989 when his chief lieutenant was murdered in his own restaurant. I think at that time Say realized that he was losing that grip from competing factions within Chinatown.
When his right-hand man, the lieutenant, got shot, the gang itself kind of broke up and disbanded. And that's what caused the void and other people trying to fill the void.
The Ping An gang was being decimated through indictments, and so there became this vacuum. And like any vacuum, it's going to be filled by whichever entity can muster the strength to fill it.
There's a lot of conflicting battles going on between rival gangs or affiliates, kind of in the midst of a turf war at that time. And some of that overflow, we believed, was the cause of the shootings that occurred that night. On January 12, 1991, in the early morning hours in Boston's Chinatown neighborhood, there was a gambling game going on at a gambling den on 85 Tyler Street. 3 individuals came in armed, had pushed through, there was a security guard there, someone manning the door, and immediately announced robbery and had laid everyone out on the ground, turned away from the shooters, and then systematically shot in the back of the head, one by one.
There were 7 people there, and 6 people were shot, and 5 of them died. They didn't discriminate between the people that they had an issue with and just people that happened to be there. They just shot everybody.
When you go up and you execute 5 people, that's very personal. That's very personal. You are up very close to a person, you place that gun in the back of their head and you pull that trigger, that's very personal.
The night of the incident was a dream because it was snowing out. There's not much action on the street. There's no prostitutes out. It's quiet. It was a beautiful night. I'm just standing there, kind of zoning out, and 2 young people come across the parking lot, and they said, "I think you might want to check this out. There's a man that looks like he's in distress." So I come running over, and the back gate of the facility was like a jailhouse gate, with bars coming down, and it was, when I tell you secure, it was secure, and he was leaning through it, and he was looking at it, and blood all coming down. It was all over his shoulders and coming down his face. You could hardly see what he looked like. He was like pressed up against those bars, and my thoughts were to get that damn door open. BPD comes in, and the 3 of us are tugging at the gate and tugging at the gate and tugging at the gate. And nothing's moving. We ran around the building, we went around to the front of the building, and we put the tire iron on that, and the 3 of us pulled it and popped it. It was bingo, we were in. We forced the door open, and that's when everything really started to go downhill, literally and figuratively, because the club was below ground. So when you'd walk in the front door, you walk down a darkened corridor, maybe of 5-6 steps, but you don't have a clear view ahead of you. The further you walk in, the more you see. When I got down at the very bottom stair, there's a table, there's a television monitor, which I found really interesting. There was a monitor inside the club that monitored the back and the front entrances. I says, wow, that's unusual. How did the perpetrator get in or whatever if these guys were paying attention to the monitor? Cards spewed out all over the table, blood all over the place. It's one that I'll never forget. There was an Asian guy sitting in a chair looking directly at me. and he was going, his mouth was moving, going like a goldfish, like a guppy. It was the strangest thing I've ever seen in my life. So you knew that he was alive, but when I got down to the bottom, I didn't go any further. I let the cops and the EMTs go and get onto the guy that's, you know, trying to get out and save his life. You know, you get into situations where you tell war stories. And every once in a while, I'd say, well, I bet you nobody has found 5 dead people in a row, all at one time. I hold the record for that.
Everyone was in shock. It just doesn't happen in Boston. We don't encounter massacres in Boston. That's unheard of.
People kind of scared. Chinatown people, we do get scared, and they're not coming out more often.
I think it affected the community terribly. To have something like that happen in your neighborhood, no one would want to have that happen in their neighborhood. And then to have something like that happen is kind of a stigma on that neighborhood.
It's something that it continued to haunt me for years. It just kind of stuck with me as one of those really bizarre crimes that you really wonder what's the real story, what really happened.
Everyone knew that it was just rival factions having a war. You know, so as long as they stay away from that, they continue their life. That's it.
And that was part of the nature of organized crime in Boston at that time. As long as they stayed within the ranks, they were just killing each other, it wasn't perceived as public menace number one.
If you stop and think, 85 Tyler Street, where the murdering was, there's 4 similar buildings right next to each other. None of the tenants moved out of the units. They felt that it was just an isolated event, you know? If they started blasting the entire street, then obviously they would have more fear. But it wasn't. It was contained downstairs in the basement, 2 o'clock in the morning. It was just unfortunate that it happened.
We don't have the police that, you know, protecting us that much, so we have our own way to how to protecting in Chinatown. Way back at that time, it's like a self-protecting, you know, program around in here.
Chinatown is part of the city. But a lot of times, why they need us, we are part of the city. Why they don't need us? They didn't even know where is Chinatown.
There's a lot of fear of being a witness. People don't want to get involved for one reason or another. If they come out, put their face out there, they're afraid that on the other end they may get repercussions.
Especially when it comes to a homicide case, a lot of people are apprehensive about talking to the police. We were lucky in this case that there was a surviving witness. To be shot in the head and survive is pretty miraculous. The surviving victim was able to make his way out and flag down a passerby who notifying some security guards at one of the hospitals.
You ever think if you hadn't been there to find the guy that survived and call the cops and?
Yeah, he would have died. He would have died. He was like, he was on his way out. I'm surprised he survived. But happy that we gained entrance to the front and managed to get help for him and save him, and in fact, save the whole case. Without him, there would be the Chinese massacre, 6 guys.
When the police showed up, an ambulance showed up, the surviving victim was brought to the hospital, and soon thereafter, he was able to give a statement to the detectives, which was key in finding out who the suspects were.
They had identified the 3 shooters by name, Hung Tien Pham, Nam the Pham, and Cindy Van Tran, and had developed information that they had fled Boston, had gone down to Atlantic City for a few nights, where our understanding was they found lodging, they gambled. And then from there, They ended up in New York City, and from New York City they punched out of the country. And around January 31st and February 1st in 1991, overseas to Hong Kong.
After the incident happened and the suspects fled, it became a joint investigation with the FBI, various other federal agencies.
Where the Violent Crimes Task Force comes in with the FBI is we handle the UFAP, which is an unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. This is a tool to assist local law enforcement. We, at a federal level, can come in and provide additional resources and assistance to track that individual down.
Years later, when I heard that they made some arrests and caught that, I was amazed. I thought it was something that would never be solved.
Back in 1999-2000, Cindy Van Tran and Nam The Tham were both arrested by the Chinese law enforcement.
They were deported to Hong Kong, I believe, in October of 2001. And then the Hong Kong authorities arrested them on our behalf.
Once they were picked up, they were ultimately extradited back to the United States, I think around 2001, to face their trial and their charges in Suffolk County, which they did so in 2005.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. Boston Police testing 1, 2, 3. This is Sergeant Detective Robert Harrington, Boston Police Department. Today is December 22nd, 2001. I'm at Area A1 on New Sudbury Street in Boston. I'm with Sergeant Detective Paul Barnacle from Area A1 and Officer Kerry Chin from Area A1. Officer Chin is doing interpreting of the interviewee, that is Cindy Van Tran.
Can you tell him that 6 people were shot that night at 85 Tyler?
呢個85泰街6個人俾人射槍。
呢個係我聽新聞朝頭早聽新聞醒緊。
He said he heard that in the news when he left the next day.
And that only 5 died and 1 lived.
有5個人死咗，同1個人仲喺度。You understand?
And the one that lived picked out his picture as being one of the gunmen.
嗰個人冇死嗰個人係咪？佢睇啲相，佢話係你做嘅。
嗰啲我唔知情況法嚟啫。
So he can't give you an explanation for that.
Both of them were convicted of 5 murder counts. They were sentenced to life in prison. It was a big moment for Boston in the sense that these 3 individuals had committed this horrific murder and had been on the run for over 10 years. And this was not only a sign to the 2 that were arrested, but also to the Asian community here as a whole that we're not going to forget. It was unfinished business. And as an agent or a police officer or detective, you never want to leave unfinished business. There are different theories of why Hong Tien Pham, Nam Te Tam, and Sin Van Tran went into this social club / gambling den and committed these 5 murders.
You don't go into a place like that, 3 people, all armed with guns, without a plan.
But I think it comes down to this vying for power, competing interests for control of that racketeering money down in the greater Chinatown area. There were slights that took place, insults that took place, which in my understanding in the Chinese culture can be somewhat insulting. They call it saving face.
Face. Asian, everything is face, you know? If you don't have face, you don't have power. One group gets offended and they have to respond. So everyone is looking for face. You gotta have respect.
Was the shootings, was it about a debt or a robbery or a woman or drugs?
佢知道後果，佢射槍因為 繼續爭錢或打劫喎，賣毒嗰啲嘢。
我唔清楚啊，呢啲唔清楚，唔清楚佢哋咩原因。
Not sure why those people are dead.
Until the suspects reveal what those motivations are, or somebody with insider information, it will always be a question mark of what was the exact motivation. Two are captured and incarcerated, but there's still one out there, Hung Tian Pham. And law enforcement will not rest until he's captured.
Hung Tian Pham, he's also known, his nickname is Hung Suk. He's currently approximately 60 years old. Pham's status was LPR, legal permanent resident, that had immigrated from Mon Khai, Vietnam. Mon Khai is a city on the northern border of Vietnam, right at China. And he'd come over here as a refugee and attained status here in the early 1980s, but ultimately ended up in Boston. His sort of bread and butter in terms of criminal activity was prostitution, illegal gambling, extortion. He had kind of rose through the ranks of the criminal enterprise that he was involved in Chinatown, and was ultimately considered like an up-and-coming individual.
He was a rising star within the Chinatown criminal community. I wouldn't call him a substantial member in the Ping On gang. If he was, he would have been indicted along with the other 15 members of the Ping On gang. But he was definitely an associate and affiliate of Stephen Say. His rise was somewhat stunted when he committed these murders and he was forced to flee.
Today, we are renewing our call for the public's assistance in locating longtime fugitive Hung Tian Pham. We are also announcing a reward of up to $30,000 for information leading directly to his arrest. We know this crime has haunted the Chinatown community for decades, and we hope this renewed effort will produce real results.
We're looking for those folks to come forward and just provide any information or point a finger somewhere that could help us locate and apprehend Pham.
I'm shocked that even got presented 30 years later. It's all history. You know, whether they find him or not, most people don't even realize or remember the massacre.
You were sort of told that you can't talk about this, right, for your own safety.
Yes.
Why 30 years later do you feel comfortable talking about it?
It's 30 years have gone by. At this stage of the game, why are they going to pop a 79-year-old guy, you know, for stuff that they already know?
The FBI, they have all different ways looking for them, and they never get them. So presumably they're gone.
How do you hide from the FBI?
How do they hide from? I have no idea. I'm not one of them.
I was talking to some of the people, you know, and when I look at news, I say, you know, why suddenly bring this up to it, you know? And they say, oh, the guy already passed away, you know.
He's long gone. They won't find him.
You know where he is?
I don't know where he is. But that's what I heard. I think he's gone.
We will never forget, and we will not rest until Hung Tian Pham is located, arrested, and brought to justice.
We're in a bigger crisis today than we were back in 1991. Asian Americans being accosted right now. We have a more fearful situation today than we ever did back in 1991. What, FBI is trying to do, good for them. As far as the community is concerned, life goes on.
I think it's important to shine a light on this, that this guy is still out there, that he hasn't answered for his crimes. He's out there someplace and somebody knows where he is.